people on entry
Okay.
so that they cannot disturb, and if someone pops in, I'll...
Right. I don't know whether if you turn your video off, that makes a difference.
No, if I keep my microphone off, should be fine.
Okay, yeah, that too. But do keep an eye open for anyone else who comes and joins us in here, because if that allows you to spotlight me, then that would be good, because then we can have people in here and they can open their mouths and wave and say hi and do fun stuff like that. We've got, what, six minutes before our first Epic Tales Enhanced of the term. This is the story that I'm going to be sharing especially for everyone who wants to pick up new stories and new words. Now, these are the stories that sometimes you might be told you're not allowed to listen to because you're too small or too young or too green. I don't know. The fact is, though, that you can enjoy these stories no matter who you are, because even if I use words that you don't know yet, I'm going to help. Bless you, Yuliu. Bless you again. Sorry, Yuliu is sneezing in the background here at the World Storytelling Cafe. But yes, if I'm going to use any words that you haven't heard before, I will help you to understand exactly what they mean. And if the story maybe gets a bit scary in places, hello, or maybe gets a bit exciting, I'm sure we'll be able to go through it together. We'll all be fine because it's a story. It's just good fun. The story that I'm going to be sharing today is a story from another country. I don't know any of the words from that other country, but I do know some very famous people from that part of the world. I'm sure you'll know at least one. I'm not going to say who they are yet because I'm going to wait until our timer goes down. Although, having said that, you may already know because you may well have heard from one of your grown-ups about exactly why I'm telling this story. Do you? Do you already know why? In a few minutes, what's it, 4 minutes, we are going to be able to hear the story anyway. If you heard the story that Janina told last week, then this one's going to be a little bit familiar to you. There's certainly a lot of similarities. I wonder if you can tell the really big difference, though. I'll be sharing that in just a moment. Of course, don't forget, wherever you are watching this, you can actually join in if you come here into the World Storytelling Cafe with me. To do that, all you need to do is be watching from epictales.co.uk or worldstorytellingcafe.com. There'll be a little button there that says Join Story, and if you click that and you have a camera, then I'll be able to see your smiles. If you click that and you don't have a camera, but you do have a microphone, I'll be able to hear your laughter. If you don't have either of those things, then that's absolutely fine. You can still come into the Zoom room, and maybe if you've got a keyboard, you could tap away and send me some messages like that. Or you can just watch from Epic Tales, World Storytelling Cafe, Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, wherever you are now. Wherever you are now, I hope you are on your bottom. It's much better. These stories are much easier to enjoy if you are on your bottom. How are we doing? 2.5 minutes to go. I'm getting quite excited by this. The first Epic Tales Enhanced of the term. These are the stories where we get to just be storytellers. There's no epic challenge. There's no fancy reason for telling the story, really, other than to just share the story. But that does mean that I might every so often use a word that you haven't heard before. If that happens, don't worry. I bet as long as you're listening really, really carefully, you will still understand the word absolutely perfectly. And oh, there we go. We've got at least one person in the audience coming up. Like always, there's going to be a little introduction with some music, and when that happens, we would like to have you guys giving that little, when we get to the drums going boom, boom. And this time there's going to be a little star that will fly out from the book with me inside going clap, clap. But to help us practice, Janina's going to be here in just a few seconds. So if you haven't had a go at this before, or if you just need a little bit of practice, get your hands ready and watch the star up there for when Janina's face appears. When that happens, get ready to clap, just as a little bit of a practice. Let's see if we can see her. Where is she? There we go. Excellent. That lets us know that you are ready and waiting for the story. So when the big theme music starts playing, you see that little star fly out, you see me sitting in there waiting, clap along with me, and I'll be back here to share the story with you. Right, better get ready. It's going to start soon, isn't it? What can I say in 17 seconds that's going to be of any interest or importance? Are you sitting comfortably? Are you sitting? Are you excited? Because I am. Here we go. Only 1 second left and get ready to clap. Well, the warmest of welcomes to you here at the Missing Sock Corner of the World Storytelling Cafe for the first Epic Tales Enhanced of term. It is really good to have you here with me. I'm going to be sharing with you today another story in celebration of one of my favorite writers, and one of the writers of many, many, many people's favorite stories. He wrote stories about really huge but friendly people. He wrote stories about little girls who could move objects with her mind. He wrote stories about foxes taking on 3 really greedy farmers. I'm sure by now you must know exactly who I am talking about. And Roald Dahl came from, well, he actually came from the southwest of the United Kingdom. But his mother came from another country in Europe. She came from the country of Norway. And when she had a little baby called Roald, she liked to tell him bedtime stories. Have you had bedtime stories? Do you share bedtime stories? The lovely thing about bedtime stories is that they allow you the chance to wind down before you go off to sleep and make sure that you are going to have the perfect dreams, dreams full of daring and adventure. Those are the kind of dreams that Roald especially loved to have when he was really small. And can you wonder why? When he had his mum telling him stories like trolls hiding in forests with children who would go and face them off with lumps of cheese, and princes riding off to slay giants who didn't actually keep their hearts inside their bodies. Or the story that I'm going to share with you this afternoon. This is a story that Roald Dahl heard from his mum when he was about the same size as you. I can say that without a doubt, because Roald was a very tall man, way, way, way taller than me. And so, as he was growing up, he would have been the size of every single one of you watching this story right now. But when he was down at the smallest, when his mum was telling him stories, he heard this story about a woman who was so grumpy that you could put dirt in the creases of her grumpy face and weeds would grow out of them. That's how grumpy she was. Her face was furrowed with those thick creases and the weeds popping out. She was so grumpy that the world looked really dark to her because her eyes were so narrow she barely let any light in. But that's because she hated the sun. The sun was far too bright for her. Everybody used to sing a song about the sun, saying how he had his hat on and he was really jolly. Well, this woman was too grumpy. She did not like anything to do with jollity or frivolity. She only loved one thing, and that was cake. Now, cake is a really delicious thing. I absolutely adore cake. Do you love cake? There are so many different types of cake as well. I mean, there are those tiny little fairy cakes. You've seen those? There are huge cakes that we have to celebrate things like weddings. Cakes are really, really lovely, but only if you eat them in moderation. You should only have a little bit of cake every, well, I was going to say every week. You probably could have a little bit of cake every day. But the important thing is that you also think about your diet, the other things you are eating, and exercise, how you are going out to keep fit. What you shouldn't do, ever, 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 is eat lots of cake for every single meal. Delicious though it is, scrumptious though it is, that is not very good for you. What happens if you do that is that the cake starts to build up inside your body. It goes very slowly through your body, and that means that your insides feel like they are always crawling and a little bit like an oil slick. If you have ever gone into a petrol station and seen the petrol dribbling in puddles across the road, that's what it feels like inside your body, really thick and gooey and slow and slimy and sludgy, all crawling down your innards. Really, really slow. And of course, the more you eat, the more it builds up, the more gunk you have, this sludge slipping down your body. But if you eat even more, then it builds up so much that it starts to push out from inside of you. And that is really, really painful. It's no wonder that this woman was so grumpy because she had that sludge icking down inside of her. It was such a huge pain and it never went away. And so she was very grumpy. This didn't stop her eating cake, of course. She loved cake. She kept on eating her cake, hoping that it would cheer her up. But it never did. It just fueled the sludge eking through her body. And the pain was constant. Don't feel sorry for her, though. Remember, this was her fault. And I don't think she'd been a very nice person to start with, because she never shared her cake with anybody. One of the reasons why it gunged her up so much was because she only ever baked her cakes and ate them all to herself. And when she went out shopping for ingredients, she was never polite to anyone. She never held the door open. She never said any words of gratitude like thank you. She was never polite enough to say please or can you help me. She would always just barge into the shop saying, "Where's my ingredients? Get out of my way! I want my ingredients right now." She would find those ingredients. She would barge her way all the way to the tills and she would say, "I want these. How much?" And the shop assistant might say something like, that is £5 27 pence, please, thank you. And the woman would say, £5 27 pence, that's far too much. You can have £2, there you go. And before the shop assistant could stop her, before the owner of the shop could stop her, she would be off with the ingredients. You'd think, wouldn't you, that the shop would then call the police or something. But this is a tale from back in the days when there weren't such things as to call police. This was from the days of the saints, the people who would travel around the world setting up churches, setting up mosques, setting up whole towns and cities that hadn't been invented yet. What town or city is near you? Even before that town was built, that's when this woman lived. To get to the shop, she would go into a village. She would give them the £2 that she wanted to pay for those ingredients, and there was nothing the shopkeepers could do to stop her. She would just come in, take, pay, leave. Those saints, though, they were traveling around the world, setting up towns, setting up cities, setting up churches, setting up mosques, setting up all sorts of wonderful places where people could go and have fellowship, meet, and eat. It must have been quite a tough life being a saint, though. Remember, back in those days, they didn't have anything like motor cars or aeroplanes. They didn't even have hot air balloons. They didn't even have bicycles. So perhaps they could have gone around riding horses, but these were saints. They didn't want to cause any sort of suffering to any other animal. And knowing that they were traveling around so much, they were worried about hurting the back of any horse or camel. So they would go everywhere on foot. I don't know whether they just didn't have shoes or whether they started wearing shoes, but after a while, their shoes disintegrated because they were walking around so much. Too much perambulation and your footwear just disintegrates. At the start of this story, though, two of those saints came into the same village as our grumpy woman. And after looking around and seeing what they thought was a really nice little site for a church, they went and knocked on someone's door to ask if they could rest their weary feet before they began the arduous task of building up a new town and a new community. It just so happened that as they saw this grumpy woman's house, the clouds in the sky thickened and got so heavy that torrents of rain came rushing forth. It was almost as if the weather knew what the heart of the woman inside was like. But these two saints, they felt that There was no one in the world who didn't deserve the company of a saint. There was no one in the world who did not deserve a blessing from God. So they went through the storm, through the rain that pounded on their craniums, until they got to the door of the grumpy woman. They knocked. And you know, don't you, that when a storyteller says they knocked, there is this tradition that you need to find something and knock on it. I've got the arms of my chair here. I don't know if you can see them, but you can probably hear them. There you go. You heard that? So when I say there was a knock at the door, see if you can give us 3 knocks like that. If you've got something hard next to you, and if you're not too worried about hurting your knuckles, don't worry if you can't. I'll certainly be doing it myself. Here we go. There was a knock at the door. Now this woman wasn't used to getting visitors. She was massively grumpy after all. Who would want to go and visit her? But she didn't want visitors either. She was too busy being grumpy, too busy making her cakes all for herself. She didn't want to share them with anybody. She wondered who it could be. Maybe it could be someone coming to collect money for the poor. Maybe it could be someone coming to try and sell her something, like some new windows. She didn't have very good windows. Maybe it would be a stranger who was lost and who didn't know where they were going. Thinking it could be any of those possibilities, the woman went up, grabbed hold of the door handle, yanked the door open and said, "Go away!" She didn't quite finish her sentence because I don't know if you've ever seen a saint before, but you may have seen them on a card that you've got at a special time of year, like, say, Hanukkah or Ramadan or Easter. If you've ever had a card at one of those times with a picture of a saint on it, you may have noticed that they have a special glow around them. In some religions, they call this a halo. In others, they call it an aura. For these 2 saints, their aura, their halo was blazing white. They were the saintliest of saints. And the grumpy woman had never seen anything like it, even though she was squinting through her eyes that made the world dark. She could still see how bright and hopeful and jolly that light was, which of course made her full of hatred. But she could also now stop and see that these 2 men who were glowing and radiating this light were soaked to the bone. The water coming down from the sky had ebbed into every single fiber of their clothing. They looked frozen, and probably because they had been walking around for so much, they also looked very skinny and cold. So the grumpy woman changed what she said, and out of curiosity asked, "What do you want?" That was, "What do you want?" in case you didn't catch it the first time. Grumpy women have this way of speaking that I know not everybody gets to catch first time, but that's what she said. "What do you want?" So one of the saints said to her, "Kind lady, we have traveled many miles to bring your land blessings from God, but we are weary, and the weather is horrid. Please, can you give us a chance to rest our feet in your establishment? so we may regather our energy before building a glorious town for you and your people near here. What do you think the grumpy woman was going to say to that? She didn't really want to. Remember, she really didn't like people. And she really didn't like light either. And these saints, they were just radiating light. But she knew what would happen if she turned them away. These were saints, after all. If they then went and knocked on somebody else's door, everybody would be talking about her behind her back. And if there was one thing that this woman hated more than anything else, it was people talking about her behind her back. They may well go and build their town, and then before she knew it, there would be even more people trudging past her house, even more people to barge through on her way to the shops, even more people knocking at her door wanting to sell her things or ask for directions. The grumpy woman knew that if she sent these two away, it could get a lot worse. So, begrudgingly, she allowed them into her living room. And that was it. Just to her living room. No further. Not a step further. You stay right there. You dry off. I'm going back into my kitchen and I don't even want to hear you. I don't even want to smell you. And with that, she turned. She opened up her kitchen door. And there was a waft of the delicious smells from within. And both of the saints, their eyes grew wider. Their eyes were almost as bright as the light from their auras. And they said, "Oh, kind lady, please, can you share some morsel of your cake with us? We have not eaten for so long. We are famished. Please, share some with us." Now, what do you think the lady was going to say? Of course, she didn't want to share any of her cake, not with these two. But she knew what would happen if she didn't. These two would go off and they would build their town and they would tell everybody about her, and then there'd be more knocks at her door. Like that. Like that. Like that all the time, with people coming along to find out directions, see if she really was as grumpy as these two men said they were, maybe try and tease her and do that thing that some little children do where they knock on the door and then run away. You'd never do that, would you? No, there's so many more important things you could be doing, like listening to stories. The grumpy woman knew it could get a lot worse for her if she did not give some of her cake to these two saints. So she said, "Wait here, I'll be back." And she slammed the kitchen door behind her. She didn't want them to see just how big and glorious the cake that she was making actually was, because she already had an idea what she was going to do. I bet you can guess, especially if you've already seen your Nina's tale. She cut two really thin slices of the cake and popped them down on those plates. But then she thought to herself, if she gave really thin slices like this, well then the two saints would almost definitely build their town and tell everybody about how stingy she was as a grumpy woman. They would tell everybody that she really wasn't very good at making cake and she had only cut like a slither. They'd call her greedy. And then she'd have loads of knocks at the door. Are you ready? Ow. There would be loads of knocking at her door with people coming to see the stingy, greedy woman who wouldn't share much more than a thin slither of her cake. But if she could make it look like those slices were individual cakes, well, then maybe she'd be able to get away with it. Maybe she would be able to convince them that actually she had lots and lots of cakes, but they were all just really small. So they would feel that they were getting a proper portion. She could eat exactly the same. It would be absolutely fine. She could always nip back into the kitchen and scoff the rest later. So she cut a third thin slice and, having these 3 slices in front of her, she began to pat them down. Now, the thing about this woman that I need to explain is that because she had this torrent of sludge moving slowly through her body, she wasn't able to move very quickly. So if she really wanted to pat down a slice of cake to make the shape of something smaller, you or I would probably take our hands like this and go pat, 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 pat. She couldn't really do that. She had to scrunch up to it like this and go like that. And then to get the top, she'd have to go like that, like that, like that. It's very tricky to do. Maybe you could have a go yourself if you get your body as frozen as you can with your hands out like this, and make sure you've got a grumpy face on if you're going to do this. You want to move your body from side to side to pat the cake slice thinner, and then try and get your hands over and knock it down kind of with your head. That's it, knock it down. As the woman did this, the cake slice took on more of the shape of an entire cake, just smaller. But then, for a reason that she could not explain, it began to get bigger and bigger as she was patting it. The width was increasing as she was tapping it. The height was increasing. And before she knew it, that slice looked exactly the same shape and size of the whole cake. The woman looked down at her hands. This was the best thing to happen in her life ever. She had this power. She had this magical power to make cakes expand with just the power of her hands. It had to be because she'd eaten all that cake. Oh yeah, there were storytellers out there who would say to you, don't eat too much cake because it turns into a sludge inside of you and it's really painful and slow as it goes down. And well, all of that was true because she did feel the pain inside her as it was really slowly crawling down. But now she had this amazing power to actually make cakes grow and grow and grow. But this meant that the cake was now far too big for those saints outside. She wanted to use this magic power all for her own benefit. So again, she cut 3 slices, took out the first one, and began patting it from side to side and knocking it down as well with a tap, 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 tap to try and get it to the same shape of a whole cake. But as she did this, it again began to grow and grow and grow until the diameter and the height was the same as the original cake. She was so amazed, but also more grumpy. She had to turn this power off. She could not let those two saints have a cake so good, so delicious, so huge. So she cut 3 slices. She took out a slice and she started to pat it down like this and tap it down like this. And as she did, the cake slice took on the shape of the whole cake, but it also began to grow and grow and grow until it was the same size. I've just realized I've made exactly the same mistake that Yanina made last week. You probably guessed by now, though, haven't you, that with 2 saints sitting in the other room, they already knew what the woman was doing. They could see that her heart had no goodness in it at all. Maybe once upon a time there had been a teeny tiny glimmer of kindness, but the pain had certainly forced it all out, and there was nothing left about her that was good. So they had cast a spell on her. They had prayed and called a miracle to happen. But this wasn't one of those miracles that is a nice, pleasant thing to happen for everybody. This was a miracle to teach this woman a lesson. And there was me telling you that the slices of cake were getting bigger and bigger and bigger, but actually, the truth was the woman was getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. The woman was now the size of a bird. To her, each of the slices did look really, really big. But in actual fact, that was because she had been getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Until she realized what was happening and she flew away out of her house in shame. So that she would always remember her lesson, though, the saints changed her into a bird that kept tapping just as she had been tapping down the height of those cakes. And you may see this bird anywhere in Europe, really. It once was very common. You may be able to find some in various places around the forests wherever you have near you. It's the kind of bird that if you happen to hear them near a tree, you might hear them knocking. That is the sound of the woodpecker. And if you go to Norway, then the woodpecker has the name Gertrude, which, funnily enough, was the name of the woman in this story. Thank you for sharing this story with me. And now that you have heard that story, remember, Roald Dahl was exactly the same size as you was when he heard that story. He loved hearing that story from his mum so much that he even shared it with other people in his letters later in life. And I'm pretty sure that Gertrude, the grumpy woman of that story, might have given Roald Dahl some ideas for some of the characters in his books. There are some particularly mean and grumpy women in those stories, aren't there? Like a certain teacher of the school attended by Matilda, or the women who gather up and like turning children into mice. Now that you have heard that story, I wonder if it's inspired a story in you. If it has, do please send it to us. You can send it to us at epictales.co.uk/challenge. And Who knows? Maybe in a future video, we will be sharing your story. We would absolutely love that. Roald Dahl heard that story and ended up becoming a writer that loads of people all around the world have heard of today. Now that you've heard it, maybe the same thing could happen to you. Right now, though, it only remains for me to say cheerio, and I hope to hear your story soon. So, cheerio! And I hope to hear your stories soon.